Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk about creating the kinds of always changing, wonderfully messy cities and towns that we humans clearly love. We'll talk with those people trying to revive them or create them anew, whether they be designers, developers, builders, planners, or just anyone interested in the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. This week, we're off to the Pacific Northwest to talk with another small-scale developer and urbanist kind of guy who's done some really cool work and who I haven't really had a chance to talk to a lot in person, but our paths cross all the time, including when this one drops. My most recent guest will have been Jim Hyde, from the small scale developer forums, and my guest today, Kerry Westerbeck, has been very involved in the small scale developer forum. So there's kind of a fun alignment there that I'm looking forward to talking about. But anyway, Kerry, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Kevin. Nice to be invited. Great to be here.
Well, it's a situation where we just know so many overlapping people. It kind of it makes it feel like the world is really small.
It really does. There's so many connections, whether it's social media or blogs or podcasts. Like, hey, I know that person, and they know that person, and all these points begin to overlap. It's fun.
Yeah, and I know there's more than like 20 people doing small scale development in the whole country, but for whatever reason, that like circle we travel in, it kind of feels like there's like 20. So I don't know.
No, it's true. It's the same bunch of us kind of keep getting hit up. Maybe we're the ones who'll enjoy talking about it. Others are just doing it and being quiet. I don't know.
Could be. There's a whole lot of people who just, proceed on in the background and do really cool stuff. So anyway, Cary is in the Seattle metro area and is doing some really neat stuff up there and has for a long time. And I wanted to talk obviously about some of the projects you've been doing, but you also have a really an interesting background getting into this that our mutual friend John Anderson kind of clued us into. And I wondered if you want to start by talking a little bit about like your own journey to being where you are now. I think we're probably around the same age.
Yep.
Ballpark. And so
early 50s.
Yep. And so, by the time you hit our age, you've probably had 2 or 3 different lives, it feels like. Or certainly professional lives, and there's a lot of different paths that people take. So let's talk a bit about where you started out.
Sure. No, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I have a lot of friends who are 5 to 10 years older, and some of them didn't know me when I was younger. And I do joke I've had many lives. I've lived many lives because I was a bicycle mechanic for much of the 90s before I finished my undergrad degree, and then went later and got a master's in architecture and became an architect 20 years ago. So I 30 something years ago, I spent 6 months in the Virgin Islands working as a cook when I was just casting about, traveling.
Oh, that's cool.
These
that
newer friends. Yeah, it was.
I think we could do a whole podcast probably just on that experience.
Yeah, in St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands, an eco resort. And so, I've had these interesting paths, and I worked for Seattle Public Utilities after my undergrad degree before I got my architecture degree. And this is in the late 90s, and decided at the time policy wasn't too thrilling to me, but I did some policy work for a while around Seattle Public Utilities work, and I was a watershed project manager for a watershed action plan. But anyway, my route to where I'm at today, I was doing that. I'd been actively involved in the outdoors here in the Northwest, biking and hiking and backpacking and stuff. But I'd always been intrigued with architecture. Even when I was younger, I thought I'd go be an architect when I was in high school. And then I kind of got into a little more carefree lifestyle in my late teens and early 20s, and really didn't apply myself very well when I was in community college, and where my friends were off at the universities and stuff. So I had kind of a more circuitous route to getting married in my mid-20s, and then deciding to finish my undergrad degree, doing that policy work, Seattle Public Utilities in the late 90s, and then deciding, hey, I've got my life together more. I'm better at studying and applying myself. I'm going to go pursue that architecture degree. So I did do that at the University of Washington from 2001 to 2004. And that's how I got my start as an architect in 2004.
Hmm.
I've always been in the Seattle area. I was born in Tacoma, just south of Seattle, and I grew up actually one town over from where I am today in Bothell, Washington. I grew up in Woodinville, Washington, next door.
Hmm.
Um, so I've stayed local, love the Northwest. But so I became an architect, and like many of us, became an intern at a good local firm in 2004, and we were just working as fast as we could as architects with that firm, which is still around today, until most of us got laid off one by one in 2008, 2009. And as we all who lived through that know that story, I think something like
Oh, nope.
40,
I
50, yeah,
still have the scars.
yeah, exactly. 40, 50% of the architects, I think, in the country got laid off within a few months,
Yeah,
something
it was brutal.
crazy like that. Yeah. So I'd only had 5 years experience at that point, but had done all kinds of work and been working a lot. So I had enough to then quickly get licensed within a year or so. And I was in the process of beginning my own firm because my wife's a librarian and a teacher. And so firms didn't have work in 2009 or so, but these teachers are still employed. And so a couple of them, we want to do an addition, we want to do a deck, whatever. So I started a small firm kind of out of necessity to make a living. And that actually worked pretty well. So I was actually doing okay during the recession, starting a small firm and learning how to do contracts and all kinds of things. But all along, we'd started owning houses. My wife and I bought our first house in 1997, prior to my becoming an architect. And my dad had always been kind of a frustrated engineer architect, and we actually lived in a couple of architecturally significant houses growing up. So I was sort of steeped in design, and so along with that, he was always remodeling our houses. So I kind of had this DIY spirit. And my brother was at that time a professional contractor and general contractor. He's now a professional architectural photographer. Interestingly enough, he
Hmm.
shoots my work. But so immediately we would remodel each house we own. We had a few houses through the years before the projects we have now that we own now. And so I wasn't afraid to put on the tool belt and learn how to do things. So I say that because we were starting to look at getting into design build when I was at the firm I worked at, Johnston Architects. And I actually built out the offices when we moved offices in 2007 or so. I was the lead on that and literally cutting the wood and building the desks and all kinds of things like that
Hmm.
because I had experience doing that and remodeling houses. And about that time, I learned about Jonathan Siegel down in San Diego. Most people know
Yeah.
who he is these days in this line of work. And one of the guys in the office had gone to one of his in-person seminars where he taught people how to be architect as developer. And I thought, hey, I've always been interested in design build and building my own projects, self-initiated work, but I didn't really understand you could just decide you're going to be your own client.
Yeah.
This is an electrifying idea. So it was planted. I didn't do anything about it for a while, but I thought, okay, well, I'll keep remodeling my houses and doing work for clients, and got a lot of on the ground construction administration, construction observation work, doing projects. Not only when I was working at Johnston for that 5 years, but then later on my own, being very hands on, both designing the projects and walking clients through those projects. So that gave me a pretty good feel for working side by side with general contractors, and I could be comfortable with that. So I started getting this bug that I wanted to self-initiate projects and become the architect as developer, idea person like Jonathan Siegel. And I was finding out about others at that time in New York and other places. And so I took the online course by, was
Hmm.
it 2014 or so, that Jonathan Siegel offered online. He decided it was too much work to do tours
Yeah.
and keep speaking. So
He was
that
probably having too much fun in San Diego too.
exactly.
So,
And by then he'd already had a lot of good projects under his belt. I think a lot of us saw his stuff winning awards and everything, so he would become pretty high profile. So that course was extremely empowering and convinced me that I've got the skill set, and he is very empowering in that way. You can go do this, and you've got the skills, and you've got the intelligence and everything. And he was right. So that led to us um, buying an existing triplex in the downtown core. I'm actually in that triplex right now, um, and with some extra land on it. And that was 2014. So we learned how
hmm.
to be. It had tenants already, so we remodeled some of the units over time, and uh, learned how to be landlords. I sold our house nearby and moved into one of the units of our family of four: my wife, myself, our two daughters who were younger at the time, and we lived in the upper floor of that existing triplex that we bought in 2014 while I designed and planned a new
So
building for the front yard.
how big? Just describe the units in that triplex. How big a space
Yeah,
were you living in?
so the triplex was actually its origin is it was a barn built in 1913 by one of the early families, kind of a founding family, the Erickson family of the city of Bothell, and it was a barn where they raised rabbits, a rabbit hutch, and it's 30 feet by 40 feet, 2 stories with a gabled roof, like literally just like the diagram of a gabled house, basically that children draw,
Huh.
and it had two units has two units in the downstairs and one unit upstairs. And then I've carved out a little office out of a shared foyer on the upstairs that I remodeled into my office where I'm sitting now. And we will replace this eventually with a building I'm working on what it will be replaced with.
So you were in basically 1,200 square feet with the
Yep,
four of you. Then a
correct.
couple little
Exactly.
kids. Yeah, yeah.
Yep, including my office. So what I'd carved out from my conference room, so just a separate door and a deadbolt stuff that I use now. We didn't use at the time when the family was living in the whole upstairs. Uh, my wife's in my bedroom was the small conference room, which I've never really used as a conference room, but it worked out great.
So did that at the time? Did that feel like a bit of a sacrifice, kind of moving into that
Yes.
space? Yeah.
Yeah, I was. So we'd remodeled it. It was kind of nice and shiny and new, and certainly an old building, but we made it look pretty nice and permitted all the work. And I moved a bunch of walls around and built new bathrooms and all kinds of stuff. And we were over here with friends, kind of looking at it one day after we got the final sign off, and I thought we should move in here and save money so we can build the new building soon. And I thought my wife's a gamer; she's pretty flexible, and I thought, well, I'll wait a day or two and see what she thinks. So I proposed the idea a couple of days later, and we'd been living in a nearby town just next door, Kenmore, for 11 years. Had a quarter-acre lot in a mid-century house. I'd remodeled every square foot. It had pretty good equity in it, and it could help us with the future project. And so I proposed the idea: let's move in, let's save money, maybe we'll travel a little more for a few years. And she loved it. So that's what we did 6 months later. And so, yeah, we
That's
kind of made a
fantastic.
sacrifice. About 3.5 years, we lived in that little 1,200 square feet.
Yeah.
But the cool thing, because I'm an urbanist too, this is a small little downtown. We're right in the middle of downtown. City Hall's a block away. They're building multifamily all around us. Most of it's built now. There's more going up. But at the time, there was only one out of about 10 buildings that have been built in that last 10 years. So I wanted to walk my talk, and the family was into it too, and be in a walkable place where we could drive less, and we were by transit and bicycling and stuff. So we've really been doing that, and
Hmm.
we had that immediately overnight. So it was an adjustment, but it was really been fun.
So by way of context, what was the local real estate market like when you bought this place in 2014?
So at the time, it always seems expensive at the time, right? Never, oh, it's so much
Yeah.
worse than it used to be. Well, it seems downright quaint and affordable now, looking back on
Yeah.
2014. Um, it was a very hot market. We got a great price when we sold our house. And we had a really good price on the triplex because the family that owned this old building it was one of many, and it was very run down, and they just wanted to get rid of it. So we got a great deal. It's worth more than double what we paid for it. So yay for us, right? Um,
Mhm.
but it all felt like a stretch at the time. Um, I honestly don't know that we could get it today. Not only because of competition, but because of the cost of land and properties down here now.
Hmm.
A key factor there was because of being an architect and into local planning issues, and we lived in the town next door, Kenmore, which does some overlapping planning at the county level and so forth with the city of Bothell, where I'm at now. Bothell had a great master plan and a new downtown code and zoning code and things like that. That was sort of a hybrid for the downtown, sort of a hybrid form-based code that I was well aware of had been written and put in place. And it was kind of a sleepy place. A lot of people didn't know. So I was well aware that this town was going to rapidly change and grow because they had set the table for it. So
Yeah.
for once, I got in kind of at the right time. But
Yeah.
it was a stretch.
Right. So at some point, you decided to take a closer look at that vacant lot next to you. And was that the next project you undertook, or was there anything
Yeah.
else after that?
So we actually, I guess we would call this the covered land play because with the triplex lot here, the city had actually bought about 4 feet because right after we moved in, they rebuilt streets and sidewalks, frontages, and really made these beautiful deluxe streets, replaced all the infrastructure, daylit a creek across the street. They did millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars worth of downtown improvements as part of this plan. But otherwise, the triplex came on a lot that had was 6,750 square feet, and so we already had the land as part of the triplex property. So when I eventually designed and built the building that I've kind of become known for that I built it in the front yard. We already had the land. I short platted as part of the building permit,
Hmm.
and I short platted because otherwise the old building rides with the new building on the financing, and that
Oh,
would
okay.
sort of drag it down. So I realized I needed to split the lot and create a brand new fresh lot that would give me some equity because there would be value given to that lot, and at the same time have the finances completely separate from the old triplex that we owned on the lot. So I turned it from one lot
Interesting.
into two, and I would do that
Yeah.
over and over if I could.
Yeah. So why do you see that? What was the advantage of that from your perspective?
You give yourself a free lot, and in small development, as you and probably many know, the land basis or the cost of land or to getting a chunk of land to build on is one of the most difficult hurdles for small operators. Um, Bigger developers can often do a purchase and sale and wait until they entitle a project to pay their 5 or 10 or 15 million for their property. That's how all the bigger projects are done around here. But small mom and pop sellers for the size of lots I'm usually looking at 5, 6, 7,000 feet, whatever. They just want cash up front, and
Yeah.
so you kind of have to commit. So to get a property that already has a building that can sort of help offset the costs, in our case, the mortgage with renters, while you split the lot, you are effectively giving yourself a new tax lot at very little cost. Just really the cost of splitting that lot is the cost. Any taxes you eventually start paying on the property tax.
Right. So what would a lot like that cost in Bothell by way of comparison? Just if you found a
Yeah,
vacant lot in a
yeah.
neighborhood.
So at the time, that lot, which is only the building I built is on a lot that's just about 2,600 square feet, 2,625, very small. There's no minimum lot size in our downtown, fortunately, like there is other places. Um, the valuation 5 years ago was 400,000. It's probably a little bit
Wow.
more than that now. So it's not inexpensive land down here. Um,
Yeah.
we're doing a project now that broke ground for a 4 unit just a few blocks away from here. So it's a good comparison. I'm working on it with two other partners. We're doing 4 townhouses. We wanted it to be more, but that's another story I could talk about later. And that lot is 5,400 square feet, I believe it is, and it was $640,000. So
Wow.
and lots have sold in the 2 years since, have become even more expensive per square foot.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah.
That's amazing. That my Midwestern brain has a hard time getting around those
Oh
numbers. So
yeah. When I look on the social media uh, groups I'm part of, the Neighborhood Development Group that John Anderson started, and Incremental Development Alliance, and others. Kansas, where you are, and then of course, Grandeur in the city, where property probably
Yeah.
costs a little bit more. Um, and then in the South and the Midwest, my jaw drops when I see what you guys can get
Yeah.
land for and lots for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a different market
It is.
in a lot
It
of ways.
is.
So let's talk about the project you built there, which I've seen
Sure.
pictures of. I haven't seen it in person, but it's a
Sure.
really cool project. It's kind of the in many ways like the classic example of a small mixed use project that we talk about in 100 different seminars
Yep.
that you were actually able to execute. So I'm curious about like why you chose that particular kind of project and some of the pros and cons of doing that.
Yeah, no, I love to talk about that. I learned so many lessons, but um, really fundamental to this was meeting John Anderson after I did the Jonathan Siegel course. I really had a lot more I needed to learn about sort of scrappy on the ground, get things done, um, part of the small development. And John Anderson, I met just at the perfect time. Development Alliance was young then, and I actually went down to Texas and took one of their boot camps in 2016. But he taught me about the for a first project, don't get too crazy. Do 3 stories you can do with like a single stair. I already knew about that. Single
Hmm.
stair is hot now, but at the time it was okay. We'll keep it 3 stories or less, single stair. The International Building Code allows that, and design it around what can be allowed with an FHA 203B loan. B or C, I can't remember it. One's the renovation loan, but this is the
Yeah.
vanilla FHA home loan that millions of Americans have gotten to buy anything 1 to 4 units. So it's if you're going to buy your first house, this is that loan. The unique thing is, unlike most mortgages, you can do 1 to 4 units, so that's not unusual, but they allow up to 49% commercial. There's no other vanilla mortgage that allows that. And I was really
Hmm.
interested in doing mixed use because I had a corner lot in downtown. And I just
Right.
felt as an urbanist who wanted to place make and create places for people that this should be a corner shop, commercial shop. So I had my sort of template then. All right, I'm gonna do 4 units. Originally I was going to redevelop the entire lot all at once, and I realized that was biting off more than I wanted to chew, and I didn't really want to get rid of a cash flowing triplex because this is my first project. So I thought, well, this is perfect. I'll split the lot. I'll do a single stair, FHA compliant building that's not going to get me out of my ski tips. That won't be built much differently than a single family home, which I had a lot of experience with, like commercial. Um, and I'll general contract it myself, and I don't get too fancy. It's a simple shape, and um, that was kind of the premise. And what I call it is a well detailed, simple box. But that was
Hmm.
the groundwork for the project to do that. And I was allowed to work on it for a few years, kind of refining and working on it, but doing it in my spare
So
time.
I want to talk about a couple aspects of it. The FHA 203B thing,
Mm-hmm.
not everybody knows about all that. Did you
Right.
have a hard time like finding a banker or bankers who understood, financing it this way?
Um, yes and no. So most mortgage uh, folks I talked to knew about it. Many of them were unwilling to originate them. I don't know if there just wasn't as much fat in it for them or what. The original, when I was finishing the project in late 2019, just prior to the pandemic, the mortgage broker I was working with at the time, who'd done a great job for me, doing refis, a refi and a home equity loan, or a HELOC for on the triplex, so I could use the triplex as sort of cash machine, which is another
Hmm.
small developer ploy. He'd
Hmm.
been really spectacular for me, really experienced, but he was very reluctant and quite frankly unwilling to originate an FHA loan because I suspect he wasn't going to get paid as well. So he brought me a commercial loan just as the pandemic was beginning, and it was really awful terms, and we had to bring a lot of money to the table. And so
Hmm.
I quickly had to go find another experienced mortgage person. And a lot of them will say they're interested, and then you get into it, and they try and deter you from doing one, the FHA. So that's information that I should share.
So you really have to kind of push through, and it
Yes.
seems, I mean, I think John has talked about this before. It's almost like you have to know more about some of these programs than, or
Yes.
know as much as like your banker does or your lender.
Yeah, John makes that point. I completely agree. I downloaded the 600 page, whatever it was, manual on HUD lending that he recommended. Granted, just not to scare everyone, you're not going to read the whole thing. You're going to kind of skim it for certain sections. And so yeah, I would quite literally call these mortgage brokers up or lenders and have to tell them they were allowed to make this loan, and this is why, and here's are the terms. And so it's so true. I got a little disgusted at certain points that I was educating these people on their own business.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did find this guy who was incredible. He was basically ready to retire, but he was just having fun, still doing things. And he found the pandemic loaning to be really tough, but also a challenge. So lucky for me. And I paid a lot of extra interest. That was the only thing in my project that went awry, as it were. The designing, the permitting, the construction all went really smoothly. It was throughout 2019. Getting the final loan mortgage, that FHA mortgage, to take out the construction loan, which was high interest because I was a new developer, was the only really challenging and expensive part of the whole project.
Interesting. So what would that product, I guess, talk us through, if you did the construction loan, like what sort of percentage equity did you have
Yeah,
to do that, or and how did you finance it? And then on when you do the permanent financing, like how did that convert?
yeah. So I was a little unusual in that I did talk to multiple banks. I'll cut to the chase. I got a hard money loan from a small two-person LLC um, that I was put in touch with from my mortgage guy at the time,
Hmm.
and they loved me. These lenders. It was 12%. Doesn't sound quite as bad today, but at the time it was twice what banks were lending for construction loans, so it was expensive. Um, but it was easy and it was fast, and draws were painless, and they trusted me. They visited the site once and completely believed in me, and the money was, we did all the paperwork. They had a first position and all the normal stuff a mortgage company would do paperwork wise. It was just not fly by night. Um, but because it took extra 5 or so months at the end to get the takeout mortgage, the final mortgage, that FHA mortgage, I paid something like $125,000 in extra interest. So that was painful. But
Hmm.
I did that. But I had talked to two different kinds of banks, and this is the kind of information I love to share with people. I did have banks that were interested in loaning on the building. One type of bank was or one type of loan, I should say, is banks who were wanted to loan to myself and my wife as a husband and wife entity building basically a house. 1 to 4 units. They just kind of saw it as a home loan, basically. They don't care if you do 4 units. And though they were wary of the commercial part. So,
Mhm.
for fair warning, they were like, "Right, we don't really loan on commercial." So we hadn't really sorted through that because we weren't offered the loan in the end. But so they did offer us a loan. It was several hundred thousand less than we needed. Ironically, it was because I'd spent a fair amount of time of my own office time working on my project. I didn't make as much money for the prior tax year. So I kind
Hmm.
of was stung by the fact that I was putting my energies into my own building, doing the construction drawings and managing the design. I looked much better on paper for the prior tax year, and they were like, "Whoa, what happened here? You dropped." Like, well, I was, giving myself as sweat equity, as it were, as an architect, and there's value in those drawings, but they don't care about that. They want your tax return to look good. So we couldn't borrow enough money to build essentially to work with a bank that wanted to loan us the money as a private home project. So they're out of the picture. We would have had to bring too much money to the table ourselves. I also talked to a commercial lender. They liked it. They wanted to loan the full amount, but they wanted a guarantor. Not unusual. I did not have
Mhm.
a guarantor. So we probably could have used a family member, but we didn't want them to have power or decision making power on the project, because they're person I'm thinking of. They're in real estate as well, and we thought, well, we want to do our own thing.
Yeah.
So we eschewed that and went hard money. So I didn't go a traditional route there, but I also learned that it's not unusual for those of us doing it for the first time to seek out private money or hard money like this.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What was the total size of the project? How many? What
Yeah,
cost?
like the stats. Okay, yeah, the total cost, we borrowed 1.3 million. It cost about 1.5 in uh, hard costs, construction costs total 1.5 million. Um, with soft costs, no, excuse me, I apologize. Trying to recall here. Hard costs were closer to, I think it was closer to the original 1.3 million, and
Okay.
with soft costs, we're at about 1.5 million. And the total value of the project in the end, at the lower end, was about 1.8 million, putting a lower end price on the value of the land. So yeah, it was so all in, if you're going to round, about a $1.5 million project.
Interesting. And then, were you, as the architect, able to pay yourself a fee for that and for the construction management?
Yes, and I'd love to talk about that. So I didn't pay myself for construction management per se, but what I did was, this project took a lot of planning, and this is the kind of thing I love to share with other architects doing this. I had learned from Jared Del Valle back in 2011. He was one of the other people I learned about the architect as developer model when I went to an architecture conference in 2011, and I was intrigued with his. I think his company was called Alloy, working in like Dumbo and New York City, and he had expressed how you have these different companies, you own them all, but they are arm's length transactions. So you have your development. And in my case, the building is called Fir Street Flats because the 183rd Street out in front of my building was originally called Fir Street, like the
Hmm.
tree, Douglas fir. So it's called
Hmm.
Fir Street Flats. And that was one LLC. And then I had my established architecture firm, Westerbeck Architecture. And then I also became a licensed general contractor, and that was my firm for that, Shelter Lab. And so they had arm's length transactions with each other. So First Street Flats had a written agreement to provide architectural services. Excuse me, Westerberg Architecture would provide architectural services to First Street Flats. Now, granted, that money is just being shuffled between my different business accounts, and I had to have
Hmm.
business accounts. And you go to the bank and you get a business account, and you have to show them your LLC
Yeah.
agreement and your state certificate and all that. But yes, so that's a long-winded way of saying Westerberg Architecture got paid by First Street Flats a fee to design the project. What happened then was I made sure that I continued to give myself a paycheck as I acted as the general contractor for a year building the building. My architecture firm was giving me a regular salary, even though I was not doing architecture work. This was so that I had um, uh, paycheck consistency that the mortgagers want to see when you're done with the project. So you don't have
Mm-hmm.
because they want 2 years. So I just had continuity there. So I used that fee once I got my loan. First Street Flats paid Westerbeck Architecture for the design, and I used that money to live on, just basically as my paycheck that I would have been earning as an architect. I just prepaid it and drew on it as I built the project. So that essentially covered me to work as a general contractor, and I did not pay myself a general contractor fee or a developer fee. I
Huh.
considered it all basically, I get to keep the building because I'm not selling the building. I get to keep the building, and uh, that's my equity stake and my
Hmm.
payment.
Interesting.
So it's a little
Yeah.
unusual, but I learned all that from these various people I studied.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because obviously for any architects, in the audience to think about getting into development, that's just an aspect of it, which is,
It's key.
paying yourself, covering your overhead during that process, the design process and construction process. It's pretty cool that you also did the construction management. There's probably a lot of architects
Yeah.
who wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's really a critical thing to understand going in. Are you comfortable being your own general contractor or not? And then if you're not, and you're going to have someone do it, which is not uncommon, you're going to pay a little bit more. It
Right.
might, it's smart for a lot of people though, because there's so many pitfalls in construction if you're not um, skilled at it. And
Right.
I had my snafus here and there, but I handled them. Uh, but they're going to happen whether you're building it or not yourself or not. So
So when you get this project complete, from the construction standpoint, how did it go from a leasing standpoint?
Um, so I'll add one more thing that I hadn't shared is I designed the entire third floor, top floor for our family to live in. So we designed it
Hmm,
custom for ourselves. It's not like super fancy, but each floor has 10-foot ceilings. There's a lot of glazing. There's a couple exposed steel beams. The top floor has 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a nice kind of big great room. People really like the space. It's nicely proportioned. So we were building a home for ourselves as well. So we are living,
hmm,
and that's another thing the FHA loan requires. It requires the owner occupancy for the FHA
interesting.
203B. And that was one of the things I hadn't mentioned. And that's very different from a commercial investment property where you are actually not allowed to live in the building. It's completely different.
Right.
They literally disallow it. So that's another reason the FHA loan is unique. But anyway, lease up was almost effortless. That's not like the right word, but we really only had a couple units. We had so my mom lives in the 1 bedroom. We have a 1 bedroom, a 2 bedroom, and we live in the 3 bedroom. And then we have the commercial space on the ground floor. Um, October, 2 months before we got our certificate of occupancy, October 2019, um, I started kind of just getting word of mouth out that I had this small commercial space, about 650 square feet on the corner available. People saw it too, and it's a very visible corner. So there was already a lot of buzz, and I had a ton of interest. So right away, a broker, actually, a very busy broker in town, brought me a barber shop, and I actually had gotten my hair cut from one of the two owners that wanted to start this
Hmm,
barber shop. And I thought, well, they're a good tenant. It's ideal. It's better than the other offers that I'd had, and so we quickly worked out a professional, you know, broker ridden lease. A couple months prior, I helped them do their a few drawings they needed to submit to the city for a small TI build out, and so that went very quickly. And I always say this, and I say this to my friends in city council, and I'm on planning commission as well. This is really important to know. There aren't enough small spaces in my town and around here, especially these younger West Coast cities. They don't have
hmm.
the plethora of old buildings with small, affordable spaces. People are always looking for small spaces. I could have leased that 650 square feet out a dozen times over.
Wow.
Whereas when they're building these bigger buildings, these 5/1s in town, which we have a lot of, the they're sort of a lost leader where they've got the retail that's hard to fill. It gets filled here because we're a busy place on the edge of Seattle, but they're 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 square feet. They take a big, national or at least a very successful local business to fill those. So there aren't nearly enough of these small ones. So leasing that commercial space was really easy, went very quickly. And I had mom for the apartment. And then we were advertising on Craigslist at apartments.com, maybe one of the two other places for the 2 bedroom, which again was filled within a week or two, probably a couple of
Yeah.
weeks. I
Yeah.
showed it
That's
three or four
great.
times and it was snapped up. And then we were done. And then we had to fill our unit because we were moving out of the old triplex. But it also found a newly married couple who started a family right away, and they were there for the first few years throughout the pandemic.
That's
So
cool.
we had
Yeah.
everything filled in no time.
That's ideal in many
It
respects.
is. I mean, you really feel like I should knock on wood or something that went so well. And we've
Yeah.
stayed full ever since. I've had a lot of people who've asked me because the building is popular. The new building's popular. I get compliments on it still all the time, and people are always asking if there are units available. So I'm flattered
Hmm.
that there's been no turnover.
Well, it's also nice from a small scale standpoint that you just have a handful you have to deal with. That's it's a
It
real
is.
advantage.
It's plenty. I've said so. We've got 7 units, including the commercial unit and our own personal unit between the two buildings, the old building and the new building. It's about as much as I want to manage because I've got very full life in other ways, and volunteer things and run my business and some development. So it's about as much as I want to deal with. If it gets much, if I get more units that I get to, that we get to keep, I will have to go. I will decide to hire a management company.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my
So
clients
what?
actually runs a good firm doing that, so I'll hire her.
Well, there you go. So what happens after that? After First Street's up and leased, and then kind of where do you go from there?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, so I had been reading about this pattern from John and others who successfully have done this in the past, John Anderson and many other small developers. You get your building stabilized, and then you borrow against it to build the next project. And I was all prepared to do that, but the pandemic hit, so I was just happy to get the thing mortgaged and keep it, because there was a couple months when we couldn't get the mortgage in line very quickly, that we were worried we were going to have to sell the building, because the plan was always to hold it. So
Yeah.
I was going to go do another project. So it's been years until I've got a couple years ago another property that I partnered with two other people, because I couldn't easily borrow against my building. So it's taken me more years than I planned to try and get to a next project. Um, so that was kind of what was next as far as the last 5 years. And it continues to be challenging to really try and find land and investors. And then right now, even if you can find that, to make projects pencil out is tough because of interest rates and the cost of land in our area and the cost of construction.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
Um,
been hard that way.
have you thought about, I'm sure you've thought about it, but like what types of projects, if you imagine that you would want to do
Mhm.
next, if you could find the
Yeah.
right site and everything else, what are you looking to do?
I'm still really intrigued with infill and small scale, urban or close in suburban work. I've looked at, and I was pretty serious about a cottage project because I'm on planning commission, and we just passed missing middle housing code for our city that I helped write. And I was actually the nerd 6, 7 years ago who would bring articles about middle housing, missing middle, that Opticos had written, to
Hmm.
council meetings and planning commission meetings and hand them out. So it's really exciting to be that annoying guy and finally get our way. I wasn't on planning commission then. So I've really been interested in bungalow courts and cottages and stuff. And I say that because it's not necessarily uh, to me, that's not like the pinnacle of what I want to do, but I like that it's sort of the gateway drug for some people
Yeah.
who are used to, single house on single lot. They seem more open minded to, okay, well, we'll put 4 small homes that are more affordable. They're still expensive, but they're more affordable for our area. And they're going to be a little closer to schools and shops and services. So it's sort of this entry, and so we're starting to see some proposals in the city of that. So I'm interested in that, and have had a kind of stops and starts on a couple of those. Doing some townhouses right now with the two partners that I mentioned earlier. We actually wanted that to be about a 10 unit, but because of parking, which we're working on eliminating those parking
Mhm.
mandates, but because of parking requirements and then interest rates, we couldn't do the build and hold model that we had hoped. So we're doing 4 townhouses. But I remain interested in, if I could have my way, I'd still keep doing mixed use, very similar to my First Street Flats project, but probably more units. I'd love to do 10, 20, 30, ideally over. I'd love to create some sort of a community space that I could program, that I could hold and keep, even if I had to sell condos or something like that and only keep the
Mhm.
condoized commercial space in the bottom. I'd love to have sort of like a community space I could rent out for events and artists and things
Yeah.
like that. It'd be great, sort of as my equity piece.
Yeah.
And I may be able to do that in my replacement for this triplex. So what I've designed for this lot to replace the triplex right now that I'm excited about is we had state legislation here in Washington State legalized co-housing, which is also essentially micro units. And
Mhm.
because we're right near frequent transit in downtown here, uh, there is no parking required. And we're also about a mile from University of Washington Bothell campus. It's a satellite campus. It's about a
Okay.
half an hour to the main campus, but it's a very busy branch of the University of Washington, and they're really close. There's students all around. They don't necessarily have cars, so that need for a parking space is not strong. There's a co-located community college there on the same campus, so they're growing all the time. And there's a lot of people in tech here who ride e-bikes around and walk, and so a lot of people don't necessarily put high priority on car ownership. So suddenly the project I've been trying to figure out how to make work on this around 4,000 square foot site, which is the old triplex I've been talking about that we own here that I'm sitting in. Suddenly it works. 20 to 22 units, 350, 400 square feet each, the kitchenette, a bathroom. The keys, you have to have a community space with a shared kitchen and so forth, which is fine. It's a fun idea anyway. And a bunch
Mhm.
of them have been successfully built in Seattle. So I'm not really excited about that right now because I'm trying to make that happen.
Interesting. So are there like zoning code challenges or anything associated with that building type?
Fortunately, nothing special. We have to codify it because there's now a ticking clock. All these cities in Washington have to allow them. So we will be, interestingly enough, tackling that in Planning Commission. I'm sure in the next year because we'll
Hmm.
have to. But the similar buildings have already been built, like I mentioned, in Seattle and elsewhere. So it's really going to be a standard, like in my case, 5-story IBC compliant building with we probably have to put an elevator in, a couple stairs, and so forth. So it'll be tight, but it works. Um, but otherwise, the zoning here is pretty generous. I'm in the second most dense zoning for the city of Bothell, um, and so we can go 5 stories, 65 feet, taller bottom story. Zero lot line except in the back. There's a 5-foot setback. And then, like I said, I get out of those parking requirements, which allows me to really use maximum use out of the site.
That's really cool, and it seems like the student angle really makes a lot of sense
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that type. Yeah.
yeah. Because the
Um,
students rent apartments around here all the time, and this would probably be a great option because most of the apartments around here are a little more expensive and a little nicer. Not nice like
yeah.
finishes, but I mean they're larger or more expensive than maybe a freshman or sophomore would want to pay for.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, and it's nice, as a student to be able to get your own place,
Yes.
even if it's really small, it doesn't matter. Like when you're that age,
Yeah.
it's just cool to have your own space.
Yeah.
So,
I make that point like in planning commission meetings and elsewhere. People say because there are certain folks who think it's really inhumane to live in a micro unit,
hmm,
and I do not. I don't think they should be making decisions about how other people want to live and make
mhm,
choices about how they want to live. But I lived on Capitol Hill in Seattle, a very dense, walkable urban neighborhood, very popular neighborhood in Seattle when I was younger, and I had a space that was actually the first year about 120 square feet. It was like 10 by 12. Bathroom was down the hall, so it's more like a boarding house. I
mhm.
absolutely loved it because it was super cheap, and I was just gone a lot anyway, so it was great. And then
Yeah.
I felt like I really arrived because the next year I had one that was about 300 square feet that seemed huge. So it's all
Well,
relative.
and it's sort of that like what's old is new again,
Yes.
um, because that type, back 100 years ago, there were all manner of types like this, not just boarding houses, but there was the classic building called the apartment hotel,
Yep.
which was really this type, and people rented a room
Yep.
in the apartment hotel, and it had some shared amenities. I mean, we had dozens of them.
Oh yeah.
Most older cities had them.
Yeah, Seattle had a ton, like you said, and we're all kind of tracking this these days. But most cities had a lot of them. They outlawed
Hmm.
them in the 70s,
Yeah.
80s, 90s. The building I was in that I mentioned that I lived in with the bathroom down the hall, with both units, bathrooms down the hall. It was a similar building. It was like a single room occupancy type, but they were all different unit sizes. There were some full size apartments, small, medium, large. It's still there. In fact, it just sold a couple years ago.
Interesting. Yeah. So one thing, obviously, in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, that area has been one of the leaders for quite a few years in the whole single stair
Yeah.
building type deal. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about
Yeah.
your experience with that and understanding of like how important of a change was that to allow that to happen in Seattle.
Yeah, and Seattle's had it for I don't know, 50, 60 years or something like that. So we've had it for a long time, and there are a lot of sort of sleeper buildings that have utilized that single stair for my entire life, and they make a small site work. In fact, I'm friends with Mike Eliason, the
Yeah.
architect who helped put the single stair idea on the map, and gets a lot of
Cool.
deserved notoriety for it. And Mike spent many years in Germany working, and so he was really familiar with that type of building, which is so common around the world. Yeah, it's for folks who don't know, and I know Kevin probably knows a lot of this, but it makes a small site much more viable because you can create a lot less hallway and circulation space by doing a single stair. Usually the building will be sprinklered, so it's safer than you would think. Um, and it allows the each unit, usually code allows usually only 4 per floor. So you usually have at least a corner and 2 aspects for light and air and cross ventilation. Sometimes, like our building, we've got 3. So it makes it much more humane to live in, and most people really respond to a building that it's not. For example, for folks listening, we've all been in hotels with a single hallway, and then that's a double loaded corridor, and they've got apartments or rooms off of each side. Most apartments in the United States built today are that double loaded, so you might have a long, deep unit if it's 2 or 3 bedrooms is uncommon, but let's say 2 bedrooms or even 1 bedroom, and there aren't a lot of windows, so all the windows are on the outside edge, and you can't get cross ventilation, and you don't have light from more than one side. So the single stair makes a much more livable, desirable unit. Most people, again, walk in one and they respond differently than they might to one of these double loaded corridor units. And what you see in a lot of countries, say they want to do a really big building, they build multiples side by side. So
Hmm.
every you might have one every 50 feet or something like that, and each stairway serves a slice. So you might end up with 5 of them in a row, and they each have their own stairway, but then they have like a firewall between each of these individual buildings, so it might look like one big building. So there are different ways to put them together. And they actually have, as Michael Eisen and others have been writing on for some time now, very good safety ratings. In fact, fewer fire incidents than we do in the United States with our
Hmm.
two stair buildings. So there's a lot to recommend them, and there's momentum behind making them more legal. Washington State, in fact, passed a law this last year. One of my friends, a representative here in Bothell, helped push the legislation that the state of Washington has to have a up to 6-story single stair building code amendment, essentially, or ordinance that any city can adopt. They're
Hmm.
not forced to, but they can adopt it and ready to go in about a year. I think it's a year and a half. So uh, I think other states are starting to do it too. California might have it, others, but the key thing is that it allows buildings like my 3-story, but you could do 4, 5, 6, and it makes a small lot instantly more developable. The reason we see a lot of these big block size, half block size buildings, we call them podium buildings, 5/1s, whatever, with 100, 200, 300 units, is because they have to aggregate land into these huge plots so they can do a big enough project to have to merit 2 stairs, multiple elevators,
Yeah.
and make them viable. Whereas once you can just do a single stair, maybe a single elevator if it's needed for accessibility, you can make almost any little slice of a lot work. So it opens up enormous amounts of our building, zoning. What do I want to say? The fabric, the land in America that we
Hmm.
maybe have looked at and not been able to utilize.
Yeah. I kind of think of it myself, if I were to go back to thinking about how I lived, like when I was in college, and the standard college dormitory that I lived in, and I think a lot of people lived in, was a double loaded corridor, little
Yep.
shoebox rooms that, 2 people stayed in together with one window.
Yep.
uh, and they weren't particularly pleasant. When you're 18 or 19 years old, that's not a big priority,
Okay.
but it's not like they weren't like the most pleasant places to live. And then when I remember, especially out of college, and I started having some friends that rented some of these more historic, like 4 and 6-plex apartments that had exactly what you described. So they had a single entry and a stair in the middle of the
Yep.
building, and then they were flanked by usually 1-bedroom apartments, sometimes 2 bedrooms, going up 2 or 3 stories. And what was so cool was you walk in those places, and it's windows on 3 sides.
Yeah.
Uh, and it just immediately felt, even for like some of these places that at the time were like really old and hadn't been renovated and God knows how long, they just felt so much better.
So true.
because of the presence of the windows and the light and the cross ventilation, and that's a huge benefit of this approach.
It's true. I don't even know if I felt completely as strongly about it as I do when I was working on my building and taking advantage of this aspect. I mean, I knew as an architect because I'm always trying to get bedrooms with two sources of natural light. These are,
Mm,
um, pattern language kind of things we reflect
yeah,
on as architects, right? But until you, I think, like you said, walk into one and experience it and kind of know you're comparing it to something with that single window aspect type of apartment, it really kind of smacks you over the head. Like you said, it doesn't matter how old it is, whatever. It's just, it's so much more humane. And
yeah,
us as a culture, as a society, as a country, waking up to how we could have that and it would be good for us and a lot of people would enjoy it. And we just kind of have to legalize it is a pretty powerful thought that
yeah.
we could have we could have nice things as the meme guy.
Right, and it's not like we're giving something up in
No,
order to get it. It's really just kind of a silly adaptation of how the building codes have grown and changed over the years. Um,
precisely. Yeah, we could just decide to do things differently and have these nice things. And hey, we might even be safer for it.
yeah, yeah, no doubt.
They,
So, one other thing, Carrie, is like we joke about here in the middle of the country is that like all the trends, of course, start on the coasts, and then eventually, like 10 or 20 years later, they find themselves here in the Midwest. But what other? Obviously, you all, especially a lot of West Coast states, have really been leading the charge because of your housing crisis is much more intense than what we are having. So there's a lot more reform happening. What else is going on that you're seeing
Mhm.
that we might be hearing more about as time goes on?
um, One of the hot ones right now that I think is going to happen, and this is going to fit right into the whole Midwest and Heartland because you guys have tons of the corner store idea.
Yeah.
We're starting to warm up in the state here and various cities, and the people, like just your average citizen, really responds well to this. Like, why don't we have corner stores anymore? Well, let's set aside the fact that they're hard to necessarily operate and run and make work. That's maybe going to have to be tackled, but it doesn't have to be a store per se. It could be a wine bar, it could be
Hmm.
a cafe, whatever. Um, so we're starting to see a trickle of bills and ideas and cities experimenting with the idea of re-legalizing corner stores. And granted, the West Coast is covered with these dendritic cul-de-sac, you know, laid out um, neighborhoods that are not grids, and they do not lend themselves well necessarily like a grid does to having corner stores and walkability and everything. So we have some challenges, but that's one of the things we're seeing people really wake up to is how do we allow uh, uh, low impact mixed use in our residential neighborhoods again.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
Spokane has a program. It goes back, I think, to 2017 because Spokane's an older city excuse me, Washington. It's not old compared to Midwest and back east, but for us, it's they were going gangbusters in late 19th century. They had a lot more corner stores that were turned residential, kind of turned into homes because they outlawed them. Well,
Hmm.
they had sort of an amnesty program beginning, I think it was 2017, with some success where you could take anything that was clearly on record as being a, a commercial store or commercial use could be turned back into a commercial use. They have a whole program for it, and Spokane's really been out on the forefront of programs like that, missing middle and other things as well. So
Interesting.
that's one I see coming that's gets talked about a lot.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, if I could like marry two things that I just personally really love, like one as an architect, I love small buildings and small spaces, and
Yeah,
the second is I love like especially what you see like in Japan, the Japanese approach to
yes,
really small businesses that are run by like one person, but are fanatic and excellent at what they do. And like to mirror and have more of that in our communities would be pretty cool.
you and me both. I'm fanatic about having those. I really, yeah, I'm so envious when I see those cute little, beautiful little Japanese stores serving
Yeah.
just specialty teas or donuts or whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Or
amazing.
like it's like the best restaurant you've ever eaten at, and it seats like 6 people,
Yeah,
so
exactly. Come back in 10 minutes. Yeah,
yeah,
it's gorgeous. Yeah, exactly. We've got to open the doors just to have people be able to sit on the stools, right? Yeah,
yeah, no
it's
doubt,
great. Yeah,
no doubt.
and so we're seeing people get more comfortable with that. And like I said, it's actually a popular idea with a lot of people who aren't necessarily into policy and planning and design. The people
Mhm.
who live in the neighborhoods frequently
So one
like,
last thing I wanted to ask you about, Kerry, was, you've been on the planning commission for some time,
yeah.
and wanted if you could talk a little bit about, why you got involved in that way, and maybe as somebody who's not just a designer, but a developer, and you have a foot
Mhm.
in all these different worlds, like what were some of the advantages for you to get
Yeah,
involved in that respect?
and a little bit of background on that. I know we don't have much time. Uh, Something I didn't talk about here, but I've been a member of Strong Towns for, gosh, probably 10 years now, kind of
Mhm.
earlier days, not super early. And so I've been on their podcast a couple times, and I've been a fan, and been part of some of their classroom, their classes and things like that. Anyway, so I've got a program background in that. I had a very successful, now kind of quieter group called BOPA, Bothelites for People Oriented Places. Our town is Bothell, which is
Hmm.
one of the early local conversations that Strong Towns now fosters really strongly. Anyway, that led me to going to lots of planning commission and build city council meetings. And then as friends and I were doing that, we've ended up taking over, many of us who were in BOPOP or were peripherally related to BOPOP, City Council, 5 people now, and most of Planning Commission, and some have cycled from Planning Commission. So anyway, my pitch to getting on Planning Commission was at the time 4 years ago, as I'll be up for another 4 years this next winter. There were no people on Planning Commission who were architects, developers, builders, engineers, anything like that. And I feel like they usually should have at least one or two who actually work in the codes and build and develop or plan or whatever. So that was actually my pitch. And some of my detractors since then have said, "Oh, he's this developer shill architect, blah blah." And I very very I'm very out about that. Like, yeah, that was literally my pitch. We should have people who are doing this work, who are reading and using the code, who are the ones helping to modify it and build it and change it. I'm very unabashed about that. So that is why I
Yeah.
wanted to be in there. And that's what we've been doing. And sometimes it's a bit boring and tedious, to put it mildly, but it's important work, and I encourage people to seek that out if you have any interest in it. Most people are still somewhat lay people, but we have a couple of people who are or were civil engineers, planners, lawyers. So they're people who do work related to making code and law who fit right in. But we like to have people who are not necessarily related too, because we like diverse perspectives on planning commission, as long as they're
Yeah.
willing to bone up and learn about how to um, operate and read the code and ordinances and things.
Yeah, it just seems, honestly logical to me that, if you have a commission or anything that is heavily involved in regulating one industry, that there ought to be some people from there, who interact with those regulations every day and who are involved. Just like if
Yep.
you had a commission to regulate barbershops, you would expect like
Yeah,
there'd be a few barbers,
yeah.
on the commission.
That's
So
why I kind of chuckle when people think there's this conflict of interest, and I say, no, that was literally my pitch. Was
yeah,
you need people who do this work, who are helping to shape these policies, and it's been good for me, and I think I've helped get a lot done. I believe that's useful for pushing us forward and streamlining and helping to housing is just a major issue. How can we sort of stay safe and compliant, but grease the skids for more housing? It's been
yeah,
a big focus.
yeah, no doubt. Well, Carrie, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I feel like we could easily go on for another hour or two, but I think
No
we'll
doubt.
call it right there. And I really value having your experience and sharing that with everybody. And hopefully, we get a chance to talk about this again at a future date.
Agreed. My pleasure. Like I said, I could keep put a quarter in me and I keep going, but I hope hopefully some of this is useful.
And how, if somebody wants to try to find you,
Yeah.
either internet or social media or whatever, what's the best way?
Yeah. I can be found. Well, my website is westerbeckarchitecture.com, and they
Okay.
could always drop me a note there. But the easiest way, I'm still on Twitter under my own name. We'll see how long that lasts. I've jumped onto Threads social media,
Hmm.
which I've been spending more time, and I could be found under my name there. So those are both good ways to find me. And then I have a business page on Facebook that I still have. I'm not on there very often, but if anybody tries to message me there or finds me there, I will see that. So I can be found pretty easily on those platforms, or my website certainly. And there's a number for my firm on the website, so people could feel free to call or text me if they want to. And many people have. I've been contacted dozens and dozens and dozens of times since finishing my building 5 years ago. And I'm always happy
Cool.
to help.
That's fantastic. All right, Kerry. Well, really appreciate the time, and look forward to talking again.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. Take care.